you ever heard somebody tell their origin story as a leader, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, maybe even somebody in ministry? And when you hear their story, it's so grandiose, it's so incredible. You're like, wow, I'm glad I get to meet this person. And then you realize, I know this person and there's no way all that's true. I actually know people whose intro to their stage presence is exactly like that. That's what I want to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Stay tuned.
Think storytelling's just for bedtime? Nah, it's the secret sauce for business magic. Stuck in a rut with bland pitches and yawning clients? Enter Boost Your Business with StoryPower. 6 weeks of epic storytelling training. It's like leveling up in a video game but for your career. Master the art of narrative and watch connections blossom like a viral TikTok. Simple, impactful, and game-changing. Ready to transform your biz vibes? Dive in now and make storytelling your superpower.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at StoryPowerAcademy.com for leadership development and communication skills training.
I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and I know there are people out there who they believe the old phrase, don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe everything you read. Only believe part of what you see. And there's a lot of truth in that. In fact, there's a lot of safety in being skeptical about everything that you hear. There's also the idea that there are many people who work really hard to build a PR campaign around themselves, around their business, around their ideas, to brand them, to have a strong reputation in the marketplace. They craft these brilliant stories. I've seen them. I've seen them done, especially with the new tools of AI, that you can craft a story that sounds so incredible, but it has no reality in it. It has no truth in it. I want to ask you, as a leader, do you find yourself with that struggle? One of my struggles has been when I try to sell myself or sell my business or sell my services, I tend to dial back because I am a firm believer in the concept of under-promise and over-deliver. I don't think I've ever had a client who felt like, at least they haven't told me if it's the case, but in 20 years of being self-employed, never had a client go, yeah, I was just really dissatisfied with the service that I got from you. Never had that happen. I've had a lot on the other side of that who are like, wow, that is so much more than I expected, so much more than I paid for. But have you ever encountered that battle yourself where you feel like I've got to dial back the story because it seems like I'm bragging? I've got to pull back a little bit so that I can still over-deliver. That's been one of my struggles. Maybe, though, you've also created that story, that backstory, that origin story, that this is how I got into the business that I'm in, this is why I do what I do, this is where I've been, this is the trauma that I've survived through. And when you're finished setting that story up, it's taken too long. It's all about you and not about your customer. It doesn't have the oomph to give somebody else the belief that what you do is for them. It's not just you working out your own issues. It's actually for the customer. See, one of the challenges for, especially when a marketing firm or a PR firm who's looking through the lens of AI or SEO or what's trending or what are people searching for, it's really easy to craft a story that sells you in a light you've never walked in. There's a word for that. It's called a myth. A mythology about the idea of humans and gods merging together. Now, it's really fascinating if you look at Greek mythology or Roman mythology or even more ancient than that, that what people read in the Bible and see as Nephilim, another worldview might call demigods, humans and spirit beings coming together. And the super accelerated, super talented, over dramatized abilities that they have, the ability to fly or Thor's hammer, or the list goes on, that these are not natural things, these are supernatural things. And it's not hard, as a regular human, not a demigod, to look at those attributes and say, yeah, that's a little mythical. That's a little over the top. That's not the norm. That's more than average. It's supernatural. See, the challenge we have is sometimes we rely on these sources to make us look good, and we go the opposite end of the spectrum. On the one side, we have that fear that I don't want to oversell myself and then not be able to deliver that. And so I undersell myself. I don't charge enough. I don't tell the true story of what I'm capable of. I only point out kind of what I think they want to buy. I don't expand my expression into all the things that I've actually accomplished and they're provable. I kind of limit them. On the other end of that spectrum, we have basically mythology. We have superpowers. We have grandiose accomplishments that might be a little fragment of not quite true, or they're taking credit for something that looks like you did it on your own, but you didn't. Let me challenge you from a story power concept of what if we didn't just talk, because we must talk about what we've done. That's where credential and credibility come from. If you haven't watched it, go into StoryPower Academy and find the 7 C's. You want to watch that, learn about the 7 C's. But after you've watched the 7 C's and you realize you got to put credibility, credential, context, content, et cetera, into every story. You should be crafting them in to every story, understanding that every audience gets a little different story because they're different audience. They hear, think, believe, see, experience differently. So coming at everyone with exactly the same origin story, probably not going to be super successful. So you do want to craft it, and you want to craft it diligently. But what if it's not just a history lesson? What if you go from telling the story of my origin, my business, my relationships, what I have done, what I did do, in a fashion that maybe embellishes just a little bit, maybe just accentuates certain characteristics, attributes, or accomplishments, maybe a little bit evangelistically. It's a little stretchy bit of truth. It's not entirely untrue, it's just not entirely true. What if we went from that to the idea of telling a story that allows people to see that when working with you, something better is coming? Now, I've mentioned on this podcast a couple of different times, one of the clients that I've worked with for over a dozen years now. And early on, the stories that were demonstrated were some of them immediate, like this is what we did last week. That's great. And some of the stories were, this is what we did 15 years ago. And sometimes it was hard to tell because of the way, before I came on board, the way that the stories were crafted, which ones were yesterday and which ones were 15 years ago. And sometimes in the course of the story, they'd be so twisted together, you couldn't tell, is that progress? I was looking at Tom Ellsworth yesterday, and he was talking about business growth when it comes to a percentage of value and EBITDA, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, sometimes what you've got to look at in the growth of a business or a nonprofit is not just where they are today, but where they were 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago, 6 years ago. And by projections, where will they be 6 months, 6 weeks, or 6 years from now? He said, when you see a company that's kind of on that hockey stick plane, and they haven't started that upward trajectory yet, your projections for them are based on what they've done historically in their growth. So if they went from $1 million a year to $10 million a year to $15 million a year to $16 million a year to $18 million a year to $19 million a year to $17 million a year to $20 million a year, everybody realizes you're going to have an off year. It happens. The economy, you can't change what happens in the marketplace sometimes. But that growth pattern looks like a 2 to 5% growth year over year. Now, if somebody goes from 10 million to 15 million to 24 million to 35 million to 50 million, their next growth is not likely to be 36 million or even 40 million. It's more likely to be 70 million. So when you look at an organization that says, it's hard to distinguish where I was in my story, in the things that we've done, in the history of our organization, it's hard to tell whether that was last week, last year, or last decade. This is not just a numbers and tracking issue, while it is that as well. It's also a how do you tell the story issue. The narrative. Is the narrative mythology? Are you making stuff up just to make yourself look good? Are you telling a history that's not fully true, or a history that's so confusing nobody could delineate it if they tried? A history that looks backward, but really not backward with integrity. It doesn't say, here's where we've grown and here's where we failed and here's what we learned along the way, because those are lessons that are valuable for the next generation to come in behind you, or an investor to look at you and go, I love the fact that you started with almost nothing, but you've already grown to this in such a short period of time, and it looks to me like you're going to continue to grow. That's a big deal. That's what people want to see. But see, that's not just a revenue measurement. I remember meeting with a mentor of mine. It's been several years ago now, but we sat down and he asked me, how do you feel like you're progressing? Because it sounds to me like the conversations we're having today have a lot of the same topics and even key phrases in them that we had this time last year or even 2 years ago. Altogether, we worked together off and on different levels of intensity over time for almost 10 years. And I said, well, I do feel like I'm coming around to another understanding of those things. And he said, do you feel like you're just going around in circles coming back to the same point? And I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, no, I don't think I am. Am I going around the same mountain? Yes. But not in the way that maybe the Israelites of ancient history walked around the same mountain for 40 years. Not in that way. I don't feel like I'm in the desert walking in a giant circle and, oh, look, I just passed that tree 4 years ago. It's not like that. Instead, I feel like it's when you're going up a switchback. We did this in Austria. We also did it in Honduras, where you feel like you're going straight up the side of the mountain. And so you go one way for a long time, and then you turn around and come back across the same path to another place, but you're at an angle. It's actually a different elevation. So the scenery doesn't change a lot, except the scenery is now further away. Maybe you've done it in an airplane or a helicopter where the elevation seems that you're not making a whole lot of progress distance-wise, but the elevation is significant. I remember driving up those mountain roads in Honduras and making those passes where you pass a bus and you're thinking one of us is going to fall off the side of here. And the first time you pass them and you're looking and you're like, that's probably steep enough to roll the truck over. And there's 8 of us in here. And then on the next pass, you realize that's enough to splat the truck when we hit the ground. And there's 8 of us in here. And we're talking about a 10-foot drop to a 50-foot drop to a 150-foot drop, just going back and forth. And from every point, we could see the same little pond at the bottom of the hill. And by the time we got to the top of where we were going, it looked like a mud puddle. If you've ever driven through the mountains, you know how that works. But see, we've got to realize that even in business and in our personal growth, we're going to have a very similar scenery as we continue to grow. The revenue is going to grow, the size of our team is going to grow, the projections of our opportunity moving forward are going to grow. All of those things are going to grow with us. When you scale, though, from what I hear, and I got to continue to study Dr. Benjamin Hardy, when you scale, it's not just making that loop back and forth, that pass that goes further up the mountain. You're like moving to another mountain. You're going from, we're traveling like a mountain goat or a pack mule or a motorized vehicle to we're now on a helicopter or a drone. And we can still see the same stuff, but we are way far removed from it. We're at 10,000 feet, not 1,000 feet. In order to get there, though, you've got to have that foundation. You've got to understand what your story is. Is it mythology? Are you building on a foundation that was really written for, the story was written for puffing you up? It was written by AI or your public relations agency or your marketing firm who said, we're going to make you look really, really good so people buy into what you have to say. Fine, for a season. But there's going to be a minute where you realize you're standing on a balloon. And I don't mean a hot air balloon. I mean, like, think of the kids when you throw all the balloons out on the floor at a birthday party and they all try to smash them as fast as they can. That's your foundation. That's the foundation of your organization. And people will believe it for a while until you really get substantiated in your business, in your relationships, in your ability to lead. And then suddenly, somebody steps on that balloon and pops it. There's a declaration of what you're capable of and it doesn't pan out. There's a claim of what you've done in the past and there's no evidence to it. Trust me, politicians do it all the time. Business leaders do it all the time. They take an attribute or an individual accomplishment and they magnify it into something that it's not. And now the floor is not lava, the floor is hot air balloons or just tiny little water balloons. And you're going to make a big mess and a lot of noise, but you're not going to go anywhere. And the more pressure you put on that, the more team you hire, the more sales you have, the more accomplishments you have, you're just putting more pressure on those balloons and eventually they're all going to pop. How do you change that? What if instead of just talking about this mythical past, this maybe I did, maybe I didn't kind of stories, blending them together in such a way that nobody can really tell, is that progress or am I still telling the same stories from decades ago? What if we start talking instead about those you help and what their future is going to look like by being helped by you? My client that when we started a dozen years ago had those stories all interlaced together. Over the period of time, has not only seen fundraising come up from $30,000 an event to over $300,000 an event. A lot of that has to do with the people who have come around. A lot of it has to do with the strategies of fundraising. A lot of that has to do with the email campaigns and the audience that's been built and the actual work that's been done by the organization. And a lot of that has to do with the way those successes have been articulated. The story that's being told. And a lot of times, that's not just the story of what we did last year or what we did in the last 6 months or what we just did 2 months ago. It's the story of what we're headed to do. We move from myth to mission. It's not just what we've done so discombobulated that you can't tell what our track record is. It's here's where we're going. Here's what I found. In business, and in nonprofit organizations, those who invest financially, invest emotionally, invest their time, they show up as volunteers, they give buy-in, they tell everybody in the world about what you're doing. Those people want to know that you have a sense of direction for where you're going. They want to see and hear that you have a vision. And if you listen to the great motivational speakers, the great business builders, Tony Robbins and Benjamin Hardy both say a very similar thing. Myron Golden, Grant Cardone, they say a very similar thing. In fact, Grant Cardone now does it on almost every mentor call. He'll tell people, stop right now for just a minute, grab a piece of paper, write down your number goals for the next year and the next 5 years. I want to know that you know this today, regardless how good it is, this is not good enough. There's something better coming. There's some future objective. There's some grand accomplishment that you have not yet reached. And when you can get your eyes on that, when you can see it on paper, your emotions about that future change. Benjamin Hardy says, if you've simply written down the goal, establishing that goal, dollar figure, number of people helped, projects served, whatever that goal is, once you've written that down, you're halfway there. Is that possibly true? Is that myth or is that mission? Well, when you're talking about a future projection, here's what begins to happen. Jack Canfield has said it. Tony Robbins has said it. Mel Robbins has said it. Once you've set that goal in mind, the reticular activating system in the subconscious brain doesn't know whether that's real or imagined, whether that's future or that's past. And when you're mission-oriented and vision established, moving towards your goals, what happens as you change that story from what was to what will be? From the myth of the past, trying to elevate what I did accomplish and make it sound more grandiose than it was, to let's not establish ourselves based only on the past. Let's begin to establish ourselves on what could be in the future. Let's work toward that. Let's establish those goals. They're 50% accomplished if you just figure out what they are and write them down. You're way ahead of most people who don't even know how they're going to get through the end of the day, through the end of the month. You know, the month seems to last longer than the money that's supposed to be in that month. Let's move beyond that. Let's stop talking about the past and start talking about the future. Let's not just tell stories, the origin story of where we were. Let's tell the story of where we, you and I, together, our mission together, my ability to serve you, your ability to be rewarded from that service, and implement it into your life strategies. Let's talk about where we're going with that. Let's set some goals. Let's tell that story about how many people you're going to help, what you're going to do differently. And as those stories begin to resonate, not just in your heart, but in your mouth, not just in your head, but in your pocketbook, not just in your imagination, but in the reality of other people who are being served, as those things continue to happen, that's when you see that growth pattern that doesn't go from 50,000 a year to 70,000 a year to 85,000 a year to the first six-figure breakthrough. But it goes from that first six-figure breakthrough to 10x that to $1 million. And then maybe 5x that to 5 million. And you're looking back at the 50K going, how did we even survive on that? We're doing 50K a month now. How did we get there from 50K a year to 50K a month? What happened? What did we do now? And now all of a sudden we're back in the myth of the past. Why aren't we still asking the question, what's next? I heard in a conversation today, Myron Golden talking to Benjamin Hardy. And Myron said, help me understand why, because people ask me all the time, why do I want to make more money? And he said, I have to be honest and tell you, I got enough money. There's nothing in this world that I want that I couldn't go buy for myself right now. There's nothing that I desire to have, place that I want to go, people that I want to get to know, that I couldn't just pay for it right now. So why in the world would I want to earn more money? And before he could answer that question, something sparked in my memory, and I remember in the beginning of 9-Figure Mindset by Brandon Dawson, early in the book, he throws a challenge out. And he says, understand your success is not about you. I thought, well, that's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? That's like Postal and Service or Britney Spears and Greatest Hits. Right? It doesn't go together that my success is not about me. In the book, he explains that there are those who are destined to live a life far short of their potential because they're constantly living in the story of the past. Then there are those who have the potential to do incredible, phenomenal, world-changing things. And they're stuck in the bell curve because they believe that all the people who've said, you can't do that, you can't pull that off, you'll never accomplish that. And they've embedded that belief into their own story. Wow. And so the potential they have to change the world will never be realized. When you move your story into that mission format, success becomes your obligation. And it's not about you. It's not about the amount of money that you'll put in the bank, the things you'll buy, the places you'll go, the people you'll get to know. It's more than that. Because you can't have those things without doing some right things right at the right time. And you can't do the right things right at the right time without becoming a better version of yourself. So to move from the mythological story of your past that says, look at everything I've accomplished, into a future that everybody else looks at and says, how in the world did you do that? The first thing you've got to change is your own internal story. Now we go back to Tony Robbins. It's great to have a strategy. A strategy doesn't work if the story doesn't match. And the story doesn't hold if you don't change your state. So in the StoryPower Method, we start with story selection. Which stories, as we mine through all the stories of your life, which ones from your past do we look at and go, that is not helpful? Stop telling it. It's not helping you or anybody else. And as we mine through those stories, what we find is there are some incidences of learning mastery that can be transferred to other people who might think, well, I thought I knew that, but I've never heard it said like that. And it's your story. You lived it. You have the experience. You have the 7 C's around that story. Share that with them, not just because it's in your past, but because it's a great step for their future. And then bring that story and them forward and go, and when you apply it, here's what's possible. When you apply it, your potential comes together. When you apply it, you attract people around you who are working on the same path. When you apply it, you're going to begin to see not just growth, but exponential growth. You've got to take that story, beat it into submission. Ask constantly, is it true? Is it valuable? Is it helpful? What will I do with it? And some of those stories in the story mining process, we just get rid of. Stop telling that story. It has no use. It serves no purpose, not for you or anybody else. That's part one. Part two, craft that story. You've got to be able to tell it on the spot, on the dime, every time, with consistency, with accuracy. You don't stop believing in 15 different ways. Don't stop believing it has one way to be sung right. When you sing it, everybody knows that's what that song is. If you can play it on a guitar, everybody knows that's what that song is. Your story should have that kind of rehearsed consistency to it. Not that you have to read a script or memorize it, but you know the elements that are important or not important, what to leave in, what to leave out, what embellishment belongs there, and what parts should just be bone stock. And then you've got to connect that audience. The story you want to tell has a different reflection in a different audience. You ever take something with bright neon colors out in the sun and it all just kind of washes together? It just looks over bright. But you take it in the dark and turn on a UV light and only certain colors stand out. Yeah, that's what I mean when connecting your story with your audience. Now you can ask the question, what is the end game? What's the narrative that I want to lead? Oh, where am I taking people? This is where we move from the myth to the mission. The minute we look at not just what I have accomplished, but what I intend to accomplish for those that I serve, in that moment, everything changes. That's when the story becomes more than a metaphor, an illustration, an idea. It's so much more than that. It's so much more than the history of what I've done. It's revealing the possibilities, the future, and the potential of your clients. And when you tell that story and they get to see themselves in a different future than they've ever seen before, because you are the mentor who's been there before. That's what they want. And I don't care if you're a roadside mechanic or a heart surgeon. What people want to know is, after we've engaged, will my life be in a better place? The story that you tell is not just the mythological history of pointing up to what you want to be, but it's what you've accomplished in the light of what that will mean for their future. Move from the myth to the mission. Listen, if you're still focused on trying to build just the right SEO, just the right AI written policies and procedures and promotional devices, and it's not landing with people, it's not resonating with them, I get it. We all need more attention. Grant Cardone says it, I repeat it often, best known beats best every time. If you're not known, you can't help anybody. So you got to get known. But don't get known in a way that everything you're standing on is a balloon. Don't get known in a way that you've puffed up, built up, fluffed up what the foundation of your business, your help, your strategy is. Build those things with some core stories that are solid, researchable. People can look back and go, there's evidence to that. And then continue to add to those the future casting capabilities so that those who are watching you, those who are following you, those who are considering being served by you can look at it and go, those are exactly the results that I want. I need to engage. We've got about 2 weeks left before we start the next 6 weeks StoryPower class. This is 6 weeks where you get a chance to learn on your own. You're going to have some very specific homework assignments, and then we're going to have a 2-hour call together as a group. It's a small group. There's never more than 24 people in this group. So it's a small group. You're going to get a lot of attention, get a chance to ask your questions, rehearse your stories, get the real meat out of your story, and get some feedback on it. If you want to be a part of that, go to StoryPower Academy and click on that link. Or you might even see a little QR code pop up here on the video screen. When you see that, click on that code. You might even save some money, like maybe up to $900 if you click on the QR code that's on the screen. But if you want to be engaged, if you want to move your story from myth to mission, this is a great place to learn how to do that. It will change the way you operate your business, and it will change the way you see yourself in the mirror and in the media. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. There is a retreat coming up that I want you to know about. It's called the StoryPower Academy Retreat. This StoryPower Retreat is about focusing on your communication skills, taking them to the next level. Discover, develop, draft, deploy, and deliver some of the best stories you've ever learned. You're going to listen, create, connect, relax, and reflect around this beautiful lake scene in Granbury, Texas. It's a chance to rejuvenate and refresh and start over with some of the best training you can possibly imagine around storytelling, leadership, and communication. Join us, get away, and relax.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at